Today is March 19th, 2022. It is a Saturday, and once again, welcome to another episode of Misfits of the Galaxy, a vlog series where I go through my thought processes and ideas in putting together a space opera high fantasy campaign setting for my fellow players in the Isle of Misfit Rolls podcast. If you have not heard of us before, we are a podcast group and we've been playing together for several years now. The first season is all up and available. I'll put links down below, and we're coming into our second season now, which we are actually doing Twitch live streams of. Normally every Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, typically going to about 11:30 Eastern Standard Time every Tuesday night. If you want to check us out, I strongly recommend it. It's a lot of fun, and you get to see this ugly mug a bit more, and you get to see my fellow players as well as we react to our Mike DM's campaign as we travel through the world of Vertes. Anyways, as I've said on my previous episodes, I use a lot of material from the Dark Matter setting, from which is a third-party 5th edition rule setting by Mage Press, which was formerly known as the Middle Finger of Vecna. I'll put a link to them down below. I strongly recommend their material in general. This is in no way sponsored by them, but I really like their stuff, and anyone hoping to get a little bit more out of their D&D experience beyond what's just available by Wizards of the Coast, I'd strongly recommend their stuff. It's pretty cool, and they have way more content than just sort of like D&D in space. With that said, I'd like to just comment that if you have been paying attention recently to the playtest material that's coming out by Wizards of the Coast, they've thrown out some material for Kryn for the Dragonlance setting, which several people I know are excited about. It's been a long time coming. Additionally, prior to that, they did one on Spelljammer, which is kind of funny because I kind of started this plan just before that Spelljammer announcement came out, and while I may have not started these recordings at that point, it was like, wow, okay, maybe I should make something on Dark Sun, see what happens. But anyways, or Birthright. Well, anyways, let's get into the content here. So, as I said before, I normally like everything that Mage Press has come out with for Dark Matter. The one thing that criticism I have is what they did developing their vehicle system or vehicles in general and I'll explain that in a moment. And I'll explain what I'm going to do instead I'll explain my thought process behind that. So they introduced mega damage and mega size categories to Dark Matter, and first time I was ever introduced to mega damage was with Rifts. Palladium, I hope I pronounced that name, was the company that came out with Rifts originally before the latest Savage Worlds version of it came out. And they introduced me to Mega Damage, that and their Robotech series, where I think it was like you had to do 1,000 points of damage to even inflict a single point of mega damage, and anything less than that, and you just completely ignored it. Because I think it was 1,000. I'm not exactly certain off the top of my head. It might have been 100. But I was never a big fan. I understand they were trying to reduce the numbers in the setting, which is great and all. But at the same time, it makes it so that it's a power creep scenario where it's like you need mega damage weapons and armor to play that game, or else you are just going to end up dead or being unable to hurt anything. In the Dark Matter setting, they reintroduced mega damage as 1 point of mega damage equals 100 regular hit points worth of damage. And pretty much, they also introduced what's called a mega size the mega size category, which pretty much every starship and vehicle in the setting falls under that category. I'm not too happy with that. That's my personal criticism on the matter. There are some vehicles that are on the same scale as like a wagon drawn by horses. there's no sense that that should be a mega size category. But the reason it is so that it can use all these mega damage and mega hit points or mega points and all that sort of stuff, all these mechanics. And so their system, as I said before, it's 100 points of damage equals 1 mega damage, meaning that you're just a one-man saucer or starfighter can take easily 900 points of regular damage. And if you don't do 100 points of damage in a single hit, it doesn't take any damage. And that doesn't include its shields or anything like that. It just bounces off its hull. And I can understand that. You have a bunch of you go to a primitive world in a starfighter, and it's like, okay, they shoot bows and arrows at it. The arrows kind of like bounce off its hull, barely scratching the paint. That kind of makes sense. But if a wizard like hurls a fireball at this Magitech starfighter, it should do something to it. It shouldn't just be, oh, well, you didn't do 100 points of damage, too bad. Not to mention the fact, like, the damage on these weapons are scaled up to this mega damage, too, which they try to say, okay, well, that's not a big deal because mega damage or mega sized vehicles and weapons can only damage other mega sized vehicles and what have you, and maybe gargantuan if you're lucky, because everything else is too small scale. But yet again, you run into this problem where you have a starfighter the size of a wagon and horse, or a wagon and horses, and apparently that is too that can be hit by like a Star Destroyer class ship, like a Corvette style, which can hold hundreds upon hundreds of people. It can be hit by that. It can hit that, but it can't hit somebody else on like it can't hit like an ogre or something. It just it doesn't sound very fun. First and foremost, it doesn't sound realistic. It doesn't sound fun. So I got to come up with a solution to that problem, because if I'm not going to use the mega damage rules, well, what exactly am I going to use? Well, there was a bit in the Ghost of Salt Marsh by Wizards of the Coast. They discussed like naval combat a little, so I'm going to use a few of those rules and a few others from here and there. Now, in 3.5, they ships and structures had what was called hardness value, which was basically damage reduction. Let's say you have a hardness value of 5, the first 5 points of damage from an attack would immediately be mitigated, and everything else would go over. In 5th edition, you have damage threshold, which is, let's say you have a damage threshold of 10. If a target attacks you and doesn't do a minimum of 10 points of damage in that attack, it's ignored. But if they do the damage threshold or higher, it all goes through. And that's for pretty much any sort of object in D&D has that mechanic behind it for 5th edition. So I'm thinking what I'm going to do is, rather than using mega damage, I'm going to use damage thresholds. And of course, like your big Star Destroyer or Corvette style ship will have a rather large damage threshold, making it next to impossible to damage it with like small scale magics, like cantrips or bows and arrows, or even catapults for that matter. Meanwhile, like the higher end spells that do a lot of damage, like disintegrate and what have you, would be able to do a sizable amount of damage, or at least damage it per se. Figure, give them more hit points, give them a damage threshold. It's a lot better than using these mega damage rules. Additionally, 5th edition introduced what was called for siege weapons, they had the advantage of being able to do double damage against structures. So with that train of thought, I've created a weapon feature called Siege, which affects structures, and these vehicles are going to be considered structures for all intents and purposes. So there'll be siege weapons will be able to do double damage against against starships and what have you, and vice versa. And most of the weapons built into a starship will have that siege feature to them. On the opposite side of things, I'm going to say that siege weapons have a disadvantage when attacking non-structures, and that way it goes with the idea that it's more difficult to hit somebody with like a catapult than it is, or a ballista, than it is to hit a large object. Even if the large object is moving fairly quickly through the air, it's the idea of I'm shooting at a person versus shooting at the side of a bard. Even if that bard is moving as fast as a person, it's a lot easier to hit. Not that I know in either case. So yeah, that's my idea about the weapons and hit points and all that thus far. When it comes to the mega size category, I'm kind of scratching my head about that one. In 5e, as it is presently stands, the largest size category is gargantuan, I think. And in previous editions, they had colossal that came after. Excuse me, came after the gargantuan size categories. So I'm thinking of getting rid of the mega size category that's in dark matter, and instead go with the size categories from previous iterations of D&D. At least then, they have like players will have who have played the previous editions, or people who are listening, viewers who are listening to it, will have a better grasp than this mega size category. Otherwise, I'll be spending much of my time not only trying to explain it to my fellow podcast members, but many of the people wanting to tune in. So yeah, I'm going to go with the colossal size for most vehicles, and some of them will be smaller scale, some will be gargantuan and huge. I don't know if any of them will be large. Maybe some of the one-man fighters might be of the large size category. Who knows? I have to go through the entire vehicle list of dark matter and effectively rebuild rebuild a lot of the details on them. So that I understand that this particular episode might be a bit rules heavy for some people and what have you, but as I said before, this is me like coming up with my thought processes and ideas on how to run this game, and I want to see space combat. I want to see like starships fighting each other, shooting like magical fire bolts and laser beams at one another. I also want to have like a cool scene where you have a barbarian raging and leaping across the air with like a great axe and like cutting into the cockpit area of like a starfighter. I want that kind of stuff, and as the rules are present, I want the rule of cool effectively to be in this game. And I fear that the way the mechanics are currently written, it's not it's not presented in a manner that works well with that. So, as I said, a lot of weapons are going to have this siege mechanic where they do double damage to a structure, and that way I can have really high damage thresholds and I can have high hit points on starships and the like. Additionally, in case it ever comes up, I guess I'll have to come up with a different mechanic. If somebody wants to play a something similar to a space wizard from a certain IP that uses a laser sword, that the IP is heavily protected by a certain magical talking mouse. You all know what I'm talking about. In that particular case, those weapons like, let's just call it as it is, a lightsaber would ignore damage threshold entirely because of the way it's designed. So that's the entire idea of like a Jedi sticking a lightsaber into a bulkhead door and it slowly cutting its way through it. It completely ignores the damage threshold in those particular instances. Whew. Okay, that was a lot to digest in a very short period of time. Surprisingly, like we're only hitting the 15-minute mark at this point. So Just to recap what was discussed today. Mega damage, no good. Gonna go with damage threshold and higher hit points instead. Siege, a siege-based weapon property, and I think that's it. If anyone would like to give me some idea, maybe somebody's got a better idea than this. I have looked briefly into the fan base Star Wars fifth edition rules for their about their vehicle mechanics, but they're, I wouldn't say lackluster, but I'd like to say that they're not well polished at this point. That's my personal criticism, though. Some people might just think they're friggin' fantastic, and that's fair. It's like everyone's entitled to their own opinion. They just don't do it for me, and I don't know if it would do well with players of the Isle of Misfit Rules podcast either. So, with all that said, I don't know if I'll be doing another episode on vehicles next week. I might, or I might jump to another topic and then take this up again sometime later once I have a bit more codified rules behind it. I guess until next week, may your D20s always roll critical, and take care.